The morning sky above New York changed forever when the first alien ship appeared through the clouds. It was massive, stretching across the horizon like a floating city made of silver and light. Admiral Rebecca Torres stood in the emergency command center, watching through the reinforced windows as more ships emerged from what seemed like tears in space itself. 300 vessels of different sizes now surrounded Earth, their hulls gleaming with technology that made human spacecraft look like toys. The communication came exactly 1 hour after the fleet's arrival. The main screen in the command center flickered to life, showing a tall figure that seemed to be made of living crystal. Its form shifted between solid and translucent, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of authority that had ruled countless worlds. "I am Ambassador Krell of the Galactic Union," the being announced. "We represent 4,000 species across this galaxy, united in peace and order for over 10,000 of your years. Your species has been observed and evaluated. The conclusion is clear: humanity cannot be permitted to continue on its current path." Torres felt her heart sink as she listened to the alien's words. Around her, the command staff sat in stunned silence, their faces pale with the realization that first contact was not the peaceful meeting they had hoped for. "Your history shows a pattern of violence, destruction, and chaos," Krell continued. "Wars that consumed entire continents, weapons that could destroy your own world, and the reckless pursuit of technology without wisdom. You have poisoned your own planet and shown no signs of learning from your mistakes. The galaxy cannot afford to have such a species spread beyond its home system." The alien's image shifted, showing recordings of Earth's conflicts throughout history. Battlefields covered with bodies, cities reduced to rubble, and the mushroom clouds of nuclear weapons. Each image was accompanied by statistics that made humanity's violent nature seem undeniable. "However, the Union is not without mercy," Krell said, his crystalline form pulsing with what might have been satisfaction. "We offer you the chance to join our confederation under proper guidance. You will surrender your weapons, submit to our governance, and accept the wisdom of species far older than your own. Your technology will be regulated, your expansion limited, and your violent tendencies controlled through proper education and oversight." Torres exchanged glances with President Maria Santos, who had arrived just moments before the transmission began. The president's face was grim as she realized the implications of the alien's words. "You have 30 standard days to make your decision," Krell announced. "Submit peacefully, and your species will be preserved under Union protection. Resist, and we will be forced to take corrective action to protect the galaxy from your influence. We have dealt with aggressive species before, and the outcome is always the same. Choose wisely." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in absolute silence. Outside, the alien fleet maintained its position, each ship a reminder of the overwhelming force that now surrounded Earth. The technology gap was obvious even to untrained eyes. Human satellites and space stations looked primitive compared to the sleek vessels that had appeared without warning. Dr. Alan Price, Earth's leading expert on theoretical alien biology, was the first to speak. "They're not lying about their age or their numbers," he said quietly. "The technology we're seeing is beyond anything we could develop in the next century, maybe longer." General Robert Hayes, commander of Earth's military forces, studied the alien ships through high-powered telescopes. 300 ships, he muttered, each one probably capable of destroying entire cities. "We have maybe 50 spacecraft that could even reach orbit, and most of those are cargo vessels." President Santos turned to face the assembled leaders. "We need to consider all options," she said. "If what they're saying is true, if they really do represent thousands of species, then maybe submission isn't the worst outcome. We could learn from them, benefit from their technology." "Under their control," Hayes replied sharply. "They're not offering partnership, they're demanding surrender, complete surrender." Torres activated the room's secure communication system, connecting to other world leaders who were facing the same impossible choice. The conversations were brief and desperate. Every nation on Earth was receiving the same message, watching the same alien fleet, and grappling with the same terrible reality. Emma Foster, The brilliant engineer who had designed most of Earth's orbital defense systems studied the alien ships with professional interest. "Their formation is perfect," she observed. "Mathematically precise. Every ship positioned for maximum coverage and minimum vulnerability. It's like they're following a textbook. Is that good or bad for us?" Torres asked. Foster was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not sure yet," she admitted. "But it tells us something about how they think. Everything ordered, everything predictable, everything according to plan." Over the following days, the world watched. As governments struggled to respond to the alien ultimatum, some nations called for immediate surrender, arguing that resistance was suicide. Others demanded that humanity stand and fight, regardless of the odds. Protests filled the streets of major cities, with crowds demanding everything from nuclear strikes against the aliens to complete capitulation. The alien fleet remained motionless, a constant reminder of the choice facing humanity. Occasionally, smaller ships would detach from the main formation to conduct what appeared to be reconnaissance missions. Always returning to their precise positions in the orbital blockade, Torres found herself working 18-hour days, coordinating with military leaders around the world as they desperately tried to find some kind of response to the overwhelming threat. The aliens had made it clear that they had faced similar situations before, and their confidence suggested that the outcome was never in doubt. But as the days passed, Torres began to notice something in the meetings and communications between Earth's leaders. Beneath the fear and desperation, there was something else growing. A stubborn refusal to accept defeat, a determination that seemed to strengthen rather than weaken as the deadline approached. On the 10th day after the alien arrival, Torres received a coded message from General Hayes. The message was brief. "Emergency meeting, secure location, come alone." She knew what that meant. Some people were not ready to surrender, and they were making plans that the aliens would never expect. The choice facing humanity was becoming clear. They could submit to alien rule and live as controlled subjects in a galactic empire, or they could choose to fight against impossible odds for the right to determine their own fate. As Torres prepared for the secret meeting, she realized that the aliens had made one crucial mistake in their evaluation of human nature. They had assumed that facing overwhelming force, humanity would choose the logical path of surrender. But they had forgotten that humans were not always logical, and that sometimes the most illogical choice was the only one worth making. The secret meeting took place in an abandoned subway tunnel beneath Washington, D.C., far from any electronic surveillance that might be monitored by the alien fleet. General Hayes had chosen the location carefully, knowing that the Union's advanced sensors would be calibrated for detecting sophisticated technology, not primitive underground gatherings. Torres arrived to find a small group of military leaders, scientists, and engineers already assembled. The faces around the concrete table were grim but determined. These were people who had spent their careers solving impossible problems, and they were not ready to accept defeat without a fight. "The surrender announcement goes out tomorrow." Hayes began without preamble. "President Santos will address the world and formally accept the Union's terms. The aliens are expecting complete compliance within 72 hours of the announcement." Dr. Foster leaned forward, her eyes bright with the intensity that had made her one of Earth's most innovative engineers. "Which gives us exactly 72 hours to show them that humans don't surrender as easily as they think. The plan is simple in concept," Hayes continued. "We let them think they've won. Full surrender, complete compliance, all weapons decommissioned. While they're celebrating their victory, we hit them with everything we've got." Torres studied the faces around the table. "What exactly do we have?" "Their ships are centuries ahead of our technology. Our best weapons might as well be throwing rocks at battleships." Foster smiled grimly. "That's where they've made their mistake. They've analyzed our official military capabilities, our known technology, our standard operating procedures, but they haven't considered what humans can build when we're desperate." She activated a portable display unit that showed schematic diagrams of Earth's solar system. Red dots marked the positions of the alien fleet, while hundreds of smaller blue dots were scattered throughout the asteroid belt and the outer planets. For the past 3 weeks, while the world has been debating surrender, we've been busy, Foster explained. Mining operations, scientific research stations, communication satellites. None of them appeared threatening to the aliens because they're not traditionally military, but every one of them has been modified. Captain David Mitchell, a former Special Forces operator who had transitioned to spacecraft piloting, pointed to the display. We've turned every piece of human technology in the solar system into a weapon. Asteroid mining charges become kinetic projectiles. Solar panel arrays become electromagnetic pulse generators. Even the garbage disposal units on space stations have been weaponized. Torres felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. How many installations are we talking about? 843, Foster replied. Each one positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire against the alien formation. They're expecting a conventional military response, ship against ship, army against army. Instead, they're going to face every human in the solar system fighting with whatever tools they can find. The plan was audacious beyond belief. While the aliens maintained their perfect formation around Earth, humans had been secretly positioning weapons throughout the solar system. The Union sensors, designed to detect advanced energy signatures, had completely missed the crude but effective weapons that Earth's engineers had constructed from civilian equipment. Hayes outlined the tactical approach. The aliens think in terms of overwhelming force and technological superiority. They position their ships for maximum effectiveness against a conventional fleet. But we're not going to fight them ship to ship. We're going to hit them from every direction at once with weapons they can't predict or counter. Dr. Price, who had been studying the alien psychology, added his analysis. Their behavior patterns suggest they're used to dealing with logical, predictable opponents. Every species they've conquered has probably followed standard military doctrine. They're not prepared for chaos. That's our advantage, Torres realized. They expect us to be logical. But humans are anything but logical when we're cornered. The meeting continued for hours as the conspirators refined their plan. Every detail had to be perfect because they would only get one chance. If the initial attack failed, the aliens would adapt their tactics and humanity would have no second opportunity. Over. The next 2 days, the world watched President Santos deliver the surrender speech that the aliens had demanded. Her words were carefully chosen to sound like complete capitulation while actually containing coded messages for the resistance cells that had been organized in secret. We have learned much about the Union in these past 30 days, Santos said, her voice carrying across every communication channel on Earth. We understand their methods, their capabilities, and their expectations, and we have prepared our response accordingly. To the casual observer, it sounded like acceptance of defeat. To the hidden resistance fighters positioned throughout the solar system, it was the signal they had been waiting for. Ambassador Krell, watching from his flagship, expressed satisfaction with humanity's submission. The Union's analysts had predicted that Earth would surrender once the futility of resistance became clear. Humans, despite their reputation for violence, were proving to be as rational as any other species when faced with overwhelming force. The alien fleet began to relax its formation slightly, preparing for the formal annexation ceremonies that would follow. Several Union ships moved into lower orbit around Earth, their commanders eager to inspect their new subjects more closely. But beneath the surface of apparent surrender, the real human response was taking shape. In asteroid mining stations throughout the belt, operators who had supposedly shut down their equipment were actually preparing for the largest coordinated attack in human history. On Mars, the scientific research bases that had gone dark were actually coordinating targeting data for the hidden weapon systems. Torres, now officially supervising the military stand-down, was actually overseeing the final preparations for humanity's true answer to the alien ultimatum. Her communications with the resistance cells used channels that the aliens had dismissed as civilian traffic. hiding military coordination within discussions about farming schedules and weather reports. Mitchell led a team of pilots who had supposedly grounded their spacecraft but were actually preparing for the most dangerous mission of their lives. Their ships had been modified with every piece of offensive technology that human ingenuity could devise, turning civilian craft into weapons that the aliens would never expect. The countdown to the formal surrender ceremony began, broadcast across the galaxy as a demonstration of Union power. Representatives from member species tuned in to watch another primitive world accept its place in the galactic order. But as the ceremony approached, Torres felt a grim satisfaction. The aliens had studied human military doctrine, analyzed human weapons, and evaluated human psychology. They had concluded that humanity would submit when faced with superior force. They were about to discover that their analysis had missed the most important aspect of human nature, the absolute refusal to go quietly into the night. The surrender ceremony would indeed be a demonstration of power, but not the kind that the Union expected. The stage was set for humanity's real response to the alien ultimatum. Not the whimper that the galaxy expected, but a roar that would shake the foundations of the Union's carefully ordered universe. The surrender ceremony was scheduled for exactly 30 days after the alien ultimatum. BROADCAST, live across the galaxy as a demonstration of Union authority. Representatives from thousands of species watched as their screens showed the primitive planet Earth surrounded by the invincible Union fleet, preparing to accept its fate. Ambassador Krell stood on the bridge of his flagship, his crystalline form pulsing with satisfaction. The ceremony would be perfect, just like every other annexation the Union had conducted over the millennia. The humans would formally surrender their sovereignty. Their weapons would be destroyed, and their violent tendencies would be controlled through proper education and oversight. President Santos appeared on the main communication screen, standing behind a podium that bore the seal of Earth's united government. Her expression was solemn but resigned, exactly what the Union expected from a defeated species acknowledging its place in the galactic order. Citizens of Earth and representatives of the Galactic Union, Santos began, her voice carrying across interstellar space to billions of listeners. Today marks the end of one chapter in human history and the beginning of another. We have had 30 days to consider the Union's generous offer of membership in their confederation. Krell nodded approvingly. The human leader was following the script perfectly, using the exact phrases that indicated complete submission to Union authority. During these 30 days, we have learned much about the Union, Santos continued. We have studied their methods, analyzed their technology, and come to understand their expectations. We have prepared our response with the full knowledge of what it means for our species and our future. Throughout the solar system, humans positioned at hidden weapon stations listened to the president's words with growing tension. The coded phrases they had been waiting for were embedded in what sounded like a surrender speech, but they knew the real meaning behind the carefully chosen words. The Union has made it clear that they view humanity as a threat to galactic peace, Santos said. They have cited our history of conflict, our technological development, and our unpredictable nature as reasons why we cannot be trusted with independence. They have demanded that we prove our worthiness through submission. Admiral Torres, standing in the command center that supposedly controlled Earth's military stand-down, felt her heart racing as the moment approached. Around her, officers who had publicly accepted defeat were actually coordinating the most complex military operation in human history. We have indeed learned from the Union's example, Santos continued, her voice growing stronger. We have seen how a galaxy can be united under a single authority, how peace can be maintained through overwhelming force, and how individual species can be made to accept their place in a larger order. The alien fleet maintained its perfect formation around Earth, each ship positioned according to mathematical precision that had never failed the Union in 10,000 years of conquest. Their sensors detected no threat, no unusual activity, no sign that the humans were planning anything other than complete surrender. And so, on behalf of all humanity, I give you our answer. Santos said, her voice now carrying a tone that made Ambassador Krell's crystalline form flicker with the first hint of unease. The signal was not in the words, but in the pause that followed. For 3 seconds, exactly 3 seconds, President Santos stood in silence. To the galaxy, it looked like the natural hesitation of a defeated leader gathering courage for surrender. To the resistance fighters throughout the solar system, it was the signal they had been waiting for. Torres activated the hidden command protocol that had been built into every piece of human technology in the solar system. Execute operation. Roar, she said quietly into her communicator. The first indication that something was wrong came from the Union's sensor operators. Hundreds of objects that had been classified as civilian installations suddenly came alive with energy signatures that made no sense. Asteroid mining stations that should have been shut down were now accelerating massive projectiles toward the alien fleet. Captain Mitchell, piloting a ship that officially didn't exist, led the first wave of human fighters as they emerged from hiding places throughout the solar system. His vessel, built from a cargo hauler and equipped with weapons that violated every safety regulation Earth had ever written, screamed toward the nearest Union ship at maximum acceleration. All stations, Mitchell broadcast on the resistance frequency. This is Flight Leader 1. The word is given. Show these aliens what happens when you threaten Earth. The Union fleet, caught in their perfect formation, suddenly found themselves surrounded by weapons that their predictive systems had never accounted for. Kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed slammed into their shields, causing energy overloads that their defensive systems struggled to handle. Ambassador Krell watched in growing alarm as his formation began to take damage from attacks that should have been impossible. All ships, implement Defensive Protocol 7, he ordered. Identify and neutralize the human weapon systems. But the human weapons were not centralized systems that could be easily targeted. They were scattered throughout the solar system, built into every piece of equipment that human hands had touched. Solar panels that had been modified to focus electromagnetic pulses, communication satellites that had been turned into kinetic bombardment platforms, even waste processing facilities that had been converted into projectile launchers. The attack was chaos incarnate, exactly the opposite of everything the Union represented. There was no central command, no coordinated strategy, no predictable pattern that their defensive systems could analyze and counter. Every human installation fought independently, using whatever weapons they could improvise from civilian equipment. Dr. Foster, monitoring the battle from a hidden command post, watched as her carefully planned chaos unfolded exactly as she had hoped. They're trying to adapt their defensive patterns, she reported to Torres. But they can't predict what we're going to do next because we're not following any military doctrine they've ever seen. The Union ships, designed to fight other advanced starships in orderly battle formations, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer unpredictability of human warfare. Cargo vessels modified into suicide bombers rammed into their hulls. Mining equipment fired streams of metal debris that penetrated their shields through sheer volume of fire. Even human space stations, supposedly defenseless civilian installations, revealed hidden weapon systems that had been built into their basic infrastructure. Captain Mitchell's fighter squadron darted between the massive alien vessels. They're smaller size and erratic flight patterns, making them nearly impossible to target with weapons designed for ship-to-ship combat. They struck at sensor arrays, communication systems, and weapon emplacements with the precision of surgical strikes and the ferocity of berserker attacks. Target their communication arrays first, Mitchell ordered his pilots. If they can't coordinate, they can't adapt. The Union's response was initially confident. They had overwhelming technological superiority and they expected to crush the primitive human attack within hours. But as the battle progressed, their confidence began to crack. The humans were not fighting like any species they had ever encountered. Every Union ship carried the same weapons, used the same tactics, and followed the same procedures. This standardization had been their strength for millennia, allowing them to coordinate massive fleets with perfect precision. But it also made them predictable, and predictability was a fatal weakness when facing an enemy that thrived on chaos. Ambassador Krell, watching his perfect formation dissolve into confused retreat, finally understood what they were facing. The humans were not just resisting with primitive weapons. They were fighting with something the Union had forgotten existed: the willingness to die for freedom, the creativity to turn anything into a weapon, and the stubborn refusal to accept that victory was impossible. As the battle reached its climax, the Union fleet found itself not just defeated, but completely outmaneuvered by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The survivors began to withdraw to a safe distance, their formations broken and their confidence shattered. President Santos, still standing at her podium, watched the alien retreat with grim satisfaction. "This is our answer," she said to the galaxy. "Earth does not surrender. Earth does not submit. And Earth will never accept that freedom is impossible." The roar that shook the foundations of galactic civilization had begun, and the Union would never be the same. The aftermath of the battle left the galaxy in stunned silence. Across thousands of worlds, beings who had lived their entire lives under Union protection watched, impossible footage streaming through their communication networks. The invincible Union fleet, which had maintained galactic peace for 10 millennia, lay broken in the orbital space around a primitive world that most species had never heard of. Ambassador Krell stood among the wreckage of his flagship's bridge, his crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated severe psychological stress. Around him, surviving crew members struggled to comprehend what had happened. Their sensors showed Union ships drifting powerless through space, their perfect formations shattered by weapons that should not have existed. "Damage report," Krell commanded, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. The response was devastating. Of the 300 ships that had surrounded Earth, fewer than 60 remained combat-capable. The rest were either destroyed or so badly damaged that they could barely maintain life support. The humans had achieved the impossible, defeating a technologically superior force through sheer audacity and creative violence. Dr. Foster, now serving as Earth's primary liaison with the surviving Union forces, transmitted a message that would be recorded in galactic history as the moment everything changed. Her words were broadcast not just to the broken fleet, but to every species within range of the Union's communication networks. "This is Dr. Emma Foster, speaking on behalf of the people of Earth," she began, her voice calm despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. "We want the galaxy to understand what happened here today. The Union told us that resistance was futile, that their technology was superior, and that our fate was sealed. They were wrong on all counts." The transmission included detailed analysis of the battle, showing how human creativity had overcome alien technology. The Union's weapons were indeed more advanced, but they were also standardized, predictable, and designed for fighting conventional battles against conventional enemies. "The Union's greatest strength became their greatest weakness," Foster explained. "They achieved technological perfection, but perfection means no room for adaptation. Every Union ship used the same power systems, the same defensive protocols, the same tactical responses. Once we understood their patterns, we could predict their every move. The revelation went deeper than military tactics. Human scientists had captured several Union vessels during the battle, and their analysis revealed disturbing truths about the Union society. Their technology had barely evolved in the past 1,000 years, refined and improved, but never fundamentally changed. They had achieved stagnation disguised as perfection. General Hayes, now commanding the combined human defense forces, addressed the diplomatic representatives who had begun arriving from across the galaxy. His message was simple but revolutionary. The Union's method of maintaining peace through overwhelming force had created a civilization that was incapable of growth, innovation, or adaptation. "Look at your own histories," Hayes challenged the assembled aliens. "Before the Union, your species explored, discovered, created new technologies, and pushed the boundaries of what was possible. When did you last see true innovation? When did You last solve a problem in a way that had never been tried before? The question struck home across the galaxy. Species that had lived under Union protection for generations began to examine their own societies and realized that they had traded freedom for safety, so gradually that they had not noticed what they had lost on the former Union world of Kepler. 7. The military caste that had once been proud warriors found themselves questioning why they had accepted roles as mere peacekeepers. Their ancestors had been conquerors and explorers, but the Union had convinced them that such behavior was primitive and dangerous. The Andromedan research colonies, once the galaxy's most innovative scientists, realized that they had not made a truly groundbreaking discovery in over 500 years. Their work had been limited to improving existing Union technology rather than exploring new possibilities. Captain Mitchell, now a hero to his species and a symbol of resistance to others, led diplomatic missions to worlds that were beginning to question Union authority. His message was consistent. Humanity offered not conquest, but partnership. Earth had no interest in replacing the Union's tyranny with its own. We fought for the right to determine our own fate, Mitchell explained to the Council of Tau Ceti. We offer the same choice to any species that wants it. Join us not as subjects, but as equals. Contribute your strengths to our alliance, and we will help you rediscover what you have lost. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within weeks of the battle, dozens of species had declared their independence from Union control. The carefully ordered galaxy that had existed for millennia began to fracture. Along lines that had been suppressed but never eliminated, the Union faced a crisis unlike any in their history. Their military supremacy was broken, their ideology was being questioned, and their member species were demanding the very freedoms that humanity represented. Emergency sessions of the Union Council devolved into chaos as different factions argued about how to respond. Some Union leaders advocated for immediate retaliation, arguing that the human rebellion had to be crushed before it could spread further. Others suggested negotiation, hoping to find a compromise that would preserve Union authority while addressing the growing unrest. But the most disturbing faction was led by beings who had begun to question the fundamental assumptions of Union society. They asked dangerous questions. What if the humans were right? What if the stability they had achieved was actually stagnation? What if the peace they had maintained was actually a form of slow death? Ambassador Krell, his authority shattered, along with his fleet, found himself at the center of these debates. The being who had once embodied Union confidence now struggled with doubts that threatened to tear apart everything he had believed for centuries. The humans fight with weapons that barely function, he reported to the council. Their ships are held together with primitive materials. Their tactics violate every principle of military science. And yet they defeated us completely. How is that possible? The answer, when it came, was more disturbing than the defeat itself. The humans had won not despite their apparent weaknesses, but because of them. Their willingness to take risks, their ability to innovate under pressure, and their refusal to accept that victory was impossible had made them capable of achieving what the Union's perfect order could not match. Dr. Foster's second transmission to the galaxy included an invitation that would reshape interstellar civilization. She announced the formation of the Free Worlds Alliance, a voluntary association of species committed to mutual cooperation without centralized control. We invite any species that chooses freedom over security to join us, Foster declared. We offer no guarantees except the right to determine your own fate. We promise no protection except what we can provide for each other. But we guarantee that your voice will be heard, your innovations will be welcomed, and your future will be your own to decide. The galaxy watched as the first cracks appeared in the Union's foundation. Species that had been content under alien rule for generations suddenly found themselves questioning whether safety was worth the price they had paid for it. The battle for Earth had ended, but the war for the galaxy's future had just begun, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the outcome was not predetermined by overwhelming force, but would be decided by the choices that free beings made for themselves. 6 months after the battle that shattered the Union fleet, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The rigid order that had defined interstellar civilization for 10 millennia was crumbling, replaced by something that terrified Union loyalists and inspired former subjects in equal measure: chaos, creativity, and the freedom to choose. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the flagship Liberty, watching as ships from dozens of species conducted joint training exercises in the asteroid belt where the battle had begun. The vessels were a strange mix of technologies and designs, unified not by standardization but by the common purpose of their crews. Former Union peacekeepers flew alongside human fighters, their weapon systems integrated through innovations that would have been impossible under the old order, the free worlds. Alliance had grown from a desperate human initiative into a confederation that included over 200 species. Unlike the Union's hierarchical structure, the Alliance operated on principles of voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. Each species contributed according to their abilities and received support based on their needs. President Santos, now serving as the first director of the Alliance Council, addressed the weekly assembly that had replaced the Union's authoritarian command structure. The meeting was chaos by Union standards, with representatives arguing, debating, and sometimes shouting at each other in dozens of languages. But from that chaos came innovations and solutions that the Union's orderly process had never achieved. The Centauri Mining Collective has developed a new asteroid extraction technique that increases efficiency by 40%, Santos reported. The method combines human kinetic bombardment principles with Andromedan precision targeting systems. All Alliance members will have access to the technology within 30 days. Such rapid innovation had become commonplace since the formation of the Alliance. Species that had been restricted to maintaining existing technology for centuries were suddenly free to experiment, collaborate, and push the boundaries of what was possible. The results were revolutionary. Dr. Foster, now leading the Alliance Research Initiative, had achieved what Union scientists had declared impossible. By combining human creativity with alien knowledge, her team had developed faster-than-light communication that allowed instantaneous contact across the entire galaxy. The breakthrough had come from abandoning the Union's rigid theoretical framework and embracing approaches that their science had dismissed as illogical. The key was realizing that the Union's physics were incomplete. Foster explained to a gathering of scientists from across the galaxy. They had achieved a deep understanding of how things work, but they had stopped asking why things work that way. Once we started questioning their fundamental assumptions, new possibilities opened up. The communication breakthrough was more than a technological advancement. It was a symbol of what free minds could achieve when they were not constrained by the need for approval from higher authorities. The galaxy was suddenly connected in ways that the Union's hierarchical structure had never permitted, but the transformation was not without conflict. The Union, reduced to a fraction of its former size, faced internal divisions that threatened to tear it apart completely. Some member species chose to adapt, slowly learning to embrace the chaos and innovation that they had once feared. Others retreated into isolation, maintaining their perfect order in increasingly small corners of the galaxy. Ambassador Krell, his authority diminished but his crystalline form somehow more vibrant than before, had become an unlikely advocate for reform within the remaining Union territories. His defeat at Earth had forced him to confront the limitations of the system he had once embodied. "We told ourselves that order was peace," Krell admitted during a private meeting with President Santos. "But we created stagnation and called it stability. We eliminated conflict and called it harmony. We have much to learn from what you have built." The conversation was broadcast throughout Union space, causing shock waves that reached the highest levels of their government. The being who had once demanded Earth's surrender was now advocating for the very freedoms that humanity had fought to preserve. Some Union worlds began to experiment with limited reforms, allowing their populations to make choices that had been forbidden for generations. The results were often messy, sometimes chaotic, but undeniably alive in ways that the Union's perfect order had never been. Captain Mitchell, now serving as the Alliance's chief diplomatic officer, found himself mediating between former enemies who were slowly learning to become allies. His ship, the same converted cargo hauler that had led the desperate attack on the Union fleet, had become a symbol of what could be achieved when necessity forced innovation. The hardest part is convincing them that conflict isn't always destructive. Mitchell reported after a mission to the former Union world of Vega Prime. They've been taught for so long that disagreement leads to chaos that they're afraid to express their own opinions. But gradually, former Union subjects were rediscovering the courage to think for themselves. Artists who had been limited to approved forms began creating works that expressed individual vision rather than collective harmony. Scientists who had been restricted to improving existing technology began pursuing research that the Union had deemed too dangerous or unpredictable. The galaxy was becoming louder, messier, and more chaotic than it had been in millennia. It was also becoming more creative, more innovative, and more alive than anyone had thought possible. The final confrontation between the old order and the new came not through military force, but through a simple choice. The Union's governing council, faced with the complete collapse of their authority, issued a final ultimatum to the Free Worlds Alliance: return to the old system of centralized control, or face the consequences of galactic chaos, the Alliance's response was delivered not by President Santos or Admiral Torres, but by a group of children from different species who had been born since the formation of the Alliance. They spoke in the mixed languages that had developed naturally from the interaction of different cultures, their words carrying the confidence of beings who had never known the fear of centralized authority. "We are the generation that will inherit this galaxy," they said. "We choose freedom over safety, growth over stagnation, and the right to make our own mistakes over the security of having our choices made for us." The message was simple but profound. The galaxy's future would be determined not by the decisions of ancient authorities, but by the choices of free beings who had learned to value growth over comfort. The Union's final attempt to restore order came in the form of a massive propaganda campaign broadcast to every world that still received their transmissions. They showed images of the chaos that had erupted on former Union worlds, the conflicts that had emerged between species that had lived in peace for centuries, and the economic disruption that had followed the collapse of their centralized control systems. But for every image of chaos, the Alliance responded with evidence of progress. Species that had been stagnant for millennia were now pushing the boundaries of science, art, and philosophy. Conflicts that had been suppressed under Union rule were being resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than authoritarian decree. Economic systems that had been rigidly controlled were now adapting and evolving to meet the needs of their populations. The most powerful response came from Captain Mitchell during a galaxy-wide broadcast that reached both Alliance and Union territories. Standing on the bridge of his converted cargo ship, surrounded by crew members from a dozen different species, he delivered the words that would end the Union's influence forever. "They ask us to choose between order and chaos," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced impossible odds and survived. "But that's not the real choice. The real choice is between death and life, between stagnation and growth, between existing and truly living." He gestured to the stars visible through the bridge windows, each one representing worlds that were now free to determine their own destinies. "The Union offered us peace through submission. We chose war through freedom. They promised us safety through control. We chose danger through choice. They guaranteed us order through fear. We chose chaos through hope." The broadcast reached the deepest corners of Union space, where populations that had accepted authoritarian rule for generations suddenly found themselves questioning everything they had been taught to believe. The trickle of defections became a flood as entire systems declared their independence and requested Alliance membership. Dr. Foster, now recognized as one of the galaxy's leading innovators, stood before the Alliance Council as they prepared to vote on the most important decision in galactic history. The Union had requested negotiations for a complete restructuring of interstellar civilization. abandoning their authoritarian model in favor of something that resembled the alliance's voluntary confederation. "We have a choice," Foster told the assembled representatives. "We can accept their surrender and risk recreating the same centralized authority under a different name, or we can hold firm to our principles and continue building something truly new." The debate that followed was everything the Union had feared and everything the Alliance represented. Voices were raised, arguments were passionate, and disagreements were fierce. But from that chaos came a decision that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. The Alliance voted to accept the Union's request for negotiations, but only under conditions that would guarantee the freedom of every species to choose its own path. There would be no central authority, no enforced standardization, and no return to the stagnation that had characterized the previous 10 millennia. Admiral Torres, standing where Ambassador Krell had once delivered his ultimatum to Earth, watched as the last Union ships powered down their weapons and requested permission to dock at Alliance stations. The beings who had once demanded humanity's surrender were now seeking membership in the confederation that Earth had created. "They thought we would run when faced with superior force," Torres reflected during a private moment with President Santos. "Instead, we roared. And that roar woke up a galaxy that had been sleeping for 10,000 years. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. The galaxy was now free to grow, to explore, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. It would be messier than the Union's perfect order, more dangerous than their enforced peace, and more chaotic than their rigid control. It would also be more alive than it had been since the dawn of interstellar civilization. The children who had spoken for their generation were right. They would inherit a galaxy where freedom was valued over safety, where innovation was encouraged rather than controlled, and where the future was determined by the choices of free beings rather than the decrees of distant authorities. Earth had not conquered the galaxy. It had liberated it. And in the light of distant stars, new possibilities were being born every day, each one a testament to the power of beings who refused to accept that freedom was impossible. The roar that had begun with humanity's refusal to surrender had become the song of a new era, where every voice could be heard and every dream had the chance to become reality.